Now we are moving on. We want to get more specific into the Bill of Rights now, and the first thing we're going to talk about is naturally the First Amendment, because there's a lot in the First Amendment that we want to be familiar with in terms of what our freedoms are, because there are five pieces to the First Amendment. Some may be more natural to our lives, or they are in our lives more. But again, we're at the age where you need to be familiar with some of these things, because some of them actually have affected high school students significantly, or they do, and you just don't know it. So you do want to know what your rights are. So we're going to go through this for the next few minutes, and then I'll cut you guys loose to get working a little bit. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, obviously, we know are called the Bill of Rights. So the First Amendment, what is the First Amendment? What controversies has the First Amendment caused? Oh man, is some things that we want to look at. So again, we know that the Bill of Rights is a list of individual personal liberties. That's what those are called, personal liberties given to all citizens. So your basic rights are what we have in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Again, what was the Bill of Rights? Now, originally, the time when the Constitution Convention wrapped up, it had been 5 months. It took these guys 5 months to do that, and they had to come up with those compromises. Then they needed to write this Bill of Rights. Um, and they were the delegates, they were fed up, ready to go, and these Bill of Rights were the last things that they tried to get in there. So the First Amendment, those five things: freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and the freedom to petition the government. So here in the next few minutes, we're going to kind of dive into what those five things really mean. So the freedom of religion, it says in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And there are two pieces to that. So, first of all, we have the Establishment Clause, not Santa Claus, the Establishment Clause. The second is called the Free Exercise Clause. So, let's look at the Establishment Clause first. The Establishment Clause prohibits the government from establishing an official church or religion. In Europe, churches controlled many of the governments and discriminated against people that maybe weren't following that religion, or they were forcing people to follow a specific religion. And people didn't like that. That's one reason that a lot of people have immigrated to the United States, or at the time, many of the colonists, them or their families had immigrated to the United States seeking religious freedom. They didn't want to live in a place where the government had an established religion. So where does this come into play for us? Well, the United States, it's based on what we call the separation of church and state. Separation of church and state. Many countries, they're not separate at all. In fact, they're intertwined. Like, all the rules and laws are based on the religion that they follow. In the United States, we try to separate that. When we say church, we mean religion. When we say state, we mean the government. And we try to keep those things separate from each other. So there become some issues oftentimes as to what role, or how can religion play a role within schools, or what can't it play in schools, because schools are a government place if it's a public school. Now, we have private schools that are oftentimes, they are affiliated with a type of religion, and those schools can discuss their religion, they can practice their religion at those schools, because they're not government associated. The government gives them no money to operate. At those schools, the people that go there have to pay to go there. That's how they get their money to run the school. So they can do whatever they want with the religion at those schools. At a public school like ours, we can't do specific things with religion because the government is funding our schools. So we are, in a sense, a piece of the government. So, like, we can't have, or like me, a staff member who's a government employee, I can't force you guys to pray or to do a certain practice with religion. Um, there's a famous court case from New York years and years ago, where the state of New York was mandating that a prayer be said over the loudspeaker system in all their public schools in the morning to start out each school day. And many families were like, no, 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 no. You are establishing a religion by doing that in public schools. You can't do that. And sure enough, the court case made its way up to the Supreme Court. It's called Engel versus Vitale was um, the name of that Supreme Court case. Or like this picture here, this is what we call like a nativity scene that would be part of the Christian religion. And sometimes you see those at like out front at Christmas time in somebody's yard, or maybe that's like at a city hall. Well, they can't have that at a city hall because it's a government building and it's kind of promoting a certain type of religion. Now, in schools, can we teach like the facts about certain types of religions? We can. In fact, as juniors, you'll be in world history. We do a world religion unit in that history. So you'll learn about many of the major religions around the world. So Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Catholicism. You'll learn about those things. Like I liked teaching that. It was a great unit to teach when I used to teach world history. So we can teach you about those religions and what those religions are, like what their beliefs are, but we can't force you to do those religions or practice those religions. Again, have you ever seen prayer in our school? Probably. Can individual students pray? Absolutely. Can individual students lead a prayer for other students? Yes. But that's not a staff member, a government employee leading that prayer. So oftentimes these things can get a little messy. Some of us that compete in sports, we might go play a game at what we call a parochial or like a religious school, and they might have a prayer read before the game starts, like next to the national anthem. That's legal because they're at a school that's not a government school. It's not a public school. We can't do that at a Zealand game. Okay. It also affects like what we teach in terms of like science classes. Many religions have a belief that everything was created from like a higher being, some type of God or something like that. And that would be called creationism. Someone created all of us, or some higher being created all of us. Because we're a public school, we can't teach that in science classes. We have to teach evolution, that everything has evolved over millions and millions of years. So the establishment clause, with that, the cans, what are the things that can happen in schools? They can teach about religions in school. Okay, like I said, we can teach you about religions. We can't teach you or force you to do those religions. They can allow voluntary prayer in many examples. Voluntary, like you students choosing to pray on your own. We can transport students to a religious school. This happens all the time. Zealand Christian School here in Zealand, they use our buses, our bus drivers. Like we provide those for those. That's in a sense a Christian school, or they're affiliated with the Christian religion. Read the Bible for cultural or literacy content. The Bible would be kind of the book of the Christian religion, or not only necessarily the Bible, like the Quran, which is sort of the book that leads, or the text that people of the Muslim faith follow. Like we could get that book out and study it and read it, not to like practice what's in it, but to show like some historical context behind what's in it. We can't set up a state religion. The government cannot order a prayer to be said. And we might be talking about like the state government or the local government, or even the school can't order a prayer to be said. That would be considered the government. We can't teach religious doctrine in the school. Doctrine meaning like the practice of a religion. We can't teach that. I've mentioned that already. We can teach about the religion, but we can't teach the actual practicing of it, or forcing you to practice it as students. We can't pay seminary teachers. So we can't use government money to pay religious teachers. And then we can't teach creationism, as I mentioned. Okay, the next part of it, the free exercise clause. That prevents the government from restricting a citizen's religious expression. Again, it prevents the government from restricting a citizen's religious expression. Okay, when we say exercise, when you exercise, you're doing something, right? You're active, you're exercising. That means that we can't force somebody to or stop somebody from exercising, doing a religion. For example, even though it might be illegal, it might break laws, some of the practices or the exercises within a certain religion due to their beliefs, there's where we get some issues. So polygamy, okay, like in the United States, you're not supposed to have a marriage. Marriages aren't legal necessarily if it's between more than two people. Well, there's a religion called the Mormon religion, and not all Mormons do this, so don't think that they all do. Um, but oftentimes within that faith or some other religions, um, usually it's like men might have more than one wife. Well, according to US laws and states, like you can't do that. Yet these religions, long established religions that have been around for hundreds or thousands of years, have done that. So there becomes this battle between church and state. This religion says they do it. Our state and our government says they can't. So who wins? And oftentimes there's the the Constitution is brought up, the First Amendment, freedom of exercise, free exercise clause, and oftentimes the Supreme Court, because some of these court cases have made it up to the Supreme Court, has said, well, you know what? They're allowed to practice that religion, exercise that religion, so we can't stop them. So even though it might break laws, they get to do that religion. Um, Saluting the flag has become an issue, dealing a little bit with exercising or not wanting to exercise that because of a religious belief. So saluting the flag isn't necessarily something we have to do. It's become a controversial thing in our country, but some people don't do that for many various different reasons. Sometimes it's a religious reason. So what can you do with the free exercise clause? You can choose whatever religion you want in the United States, for the most part. You obviously can't choose something that is doing terribly illegal things. You can lead a prayer in most examples. You can ask questions about religions. You can worship whoever you want, whenever you want. You can't break the law and claim it as a religious belief. I just mentioned where you can. You can sometimes, actually, as long as you're not breaking the law, like an extreme, incredible law. Like you can't have human sacrifices, which would be considered murder, and then claim, well, it's part of my religion. Our government's not going to say that's okay. You can raise children without education. So some religions believe that that the kids don't necessarily need to go to a school, or they only need to go to school till they're like 12 years old, where we've studied that one of your legal duties is to go to school as a citizen. In most states, it's up to the age of 16. There's a famous case that goes to the Supreme Court called Yoder versus Wisconsin. There's an Amish community in Wisconsin that they are not sending their kids to school past the age of like 12. And the state of Wisconsin says, you need to send your kids to school. It's one of our laws. And they say, well, that's against our religion. At that point, we don't believe that our kids should have to go to school anymore, or it's up to them. They should get to decide. And sure enough, because they can prove that it's part of this long established religion, the Supreme Court rules with this Amish community and says, yeah, even though it's a Wisconsin law, their kids are supposed to be in school till the age of 16 or whatever, because of their religion, because of the Second Amendment. That would be breaking their Second Amendment free exercise rights. So they are allowed to exercise their religion, which means their kids don't have to go to school past a certain age, even if it's breaking a Wisconsin law. All right, freedom of speech. Congress shall make no laws abridging or stopping the freedom of speech. Well, they still can. So the individuals you can say any political belief that you want. So if you don't agree with a certain political candidate or a certain law or rule that's being made, you're allowed to speak out about it. And the government can't get you in any trouble for that. You're allowed to protest without getting out of control, without getting out of control, without getting out of control, without getting out of control. You can protest. You can say things about someone that aren't true. Do we want to encourage that? No. But that happens sometimes, and you can't necessarily get in trouble for that. Shoot, you guys walk down the hallways every day at school, or you're on social media, you see that stuff all the time. We just saw a political campaign or campaigns where people are saying what we are pretty sure are untrue things about each other all the time. And neither of those people or campaigns are going to jail for it. You can burn the United States flag. Court case, Texas versus Johnson is what the name of the court case was, that says it's freedom of speech. So sometimes we got to realize that freedom of speech isn't necessarily about the things that we actually speech. It's about the things we do or our actions, because our actions do say something about us, or they are speaking on our behalf. If you're wearing a Zealand East sweatshirt and you're out around town, like you're basically saying that you support Zealand East. Okay, that's an action of yours by some clothing that you're wearing that is considered speech. You can say racist and hate slogans. It's freedom of speech, as long as it doesn't incite violence. And free speech means someone might say something you disagree with. Yep, that's going to happen all the time. And I think it's important that we realize that that's okay. We're not going to agree with what other people say all the time, but that's their freedom of speech. This happened in Skokie, Illinois, in 1977. Skokie, if you know, it's kind of out by Chicago a little bit. They were going to have like this, like a white supremacist rally that they had to let happen. It becomes this big controversial issue because the city around it doesn't want them, like it's trying to stop them from having their little gathering. And they say, no, we can do this, which absolutely they can. Hate groups, violent, I shouldn't say violent, hate groups, racist groups, whatever. They can have parades, they can have meetings, they can do whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. There are limits to that, but they're allowed to do those things. Like we said, burning the American flag, it's legal. People are allowed to do that and not get in trouble for it. It's speech is what they would argue. And you can speak out against our government. Money has been argued as a form of speech. And so when we have these elections, there have been some arguments that people should be limited as to how much money they can give to a certain political candidate. Because if there's no limit on that money, then like really wealthy individuals or wealthy companies can give millions and millions of dollars to political candidates. So they have more of an influence than not so wealthy people would, because they have the ability to spend more money. And so a lot of people say that should be illegal. Like everybody should either be able to, there should be a limit on that amount of money, or only the government should be allowed to give money to political candidates so they all get equal. And a lot of people have said, no. Giving money to a political candidate that's speech. That's us saying that we support this political candidate, and we should be able to give as much as we want. You can't limit our speech. The very famous court case is Buckley versus Vallejo, and we'll get into that more later. So limits on persons, what you can't necessarily do. What are some limits? You can't threaten to blow up airplanes, schools, or like kill the president. Can't do that. Don't try. Don't test that one. Sexual harassment. So making comments or speaking where it's threatening in a sexual way or with some sexual content in it. Creating social contest. So you can't yell fire. There's a free speech court case that gets the Supreme Court win. A guy by the long time ago, years ago, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is a guy by the name of Oliver Wendell Holmes. And they rule against a guy that is claiming that his First Amendment free speech rights are being violated. And in his ruling, he writes, you can't yell fire in the middle of a theater. So if you're sitting down in the theater watching a movie, you can't jump up and start yelling, there's a fire in the building, blah, blah, blah. Because what's going to happen? Everybody's going to freak out and panic and chaos is going to be started. You can't speak or use your speech if it's going to create chaos like that. And that's the example he used. You can't do something like that. Extremely crude language in public forum. You can't use that. Disrespectful, vulgar language in schools. Do you hear cussing all the time in the hallways? Probably. We could get you in trouble for it, though. Things that with speech, if there's a hate crime, And hate crime usually deals with racism or extremism of some sort when a crime occurs due to somebody's race, religion, sexual orientation. Um, Obviously, some of those things are crimes anyways, but there are even sometimes worse punishments for doing those crimes because they are now considered a form of speech. Speech that incites illegal actions. Let's see here. There's a guy, Schenk is his last name. Way back, like around World War One, he's out handing out like these pamphlets. He's kind of protesting World War One, but he's also calling for the overthrow of the American government. So it's like going to incite violence. He gets arrested for it. He says, "Well, it's my First Amendment right of freedom of speech." The government says, "No, no, no, you can't do that." And fighting words, abusive or insulting language. Obviously, a lot of that's like a threat, like, "Hey, you do that again, I'm going to kill you." Like you can't do that. That's illegal. Free speech again, and we're going to look at this court case a lot, so I'm not going to go into it a ton, but I think in our next class block, we're going to look at this Tinker versus Des Moines, is how you say that, not Des Moines. Des Moines is the capital city of Iowa. 1969, some kids are against our conflict in Vietnam, where it's a very controversial war that we're fighting. Historically, is your history lesson. We send troops over to Vietnam a couple years before this because communism is spreading around the world. We don't like communism. We're trying to contain it. And so we're sending troops over there where 58,000 of our troops total end up dying over the course of 10 years or so. So pretty bloody war for us. And so many people don't understand why we're sending troops to Vietnam. In fact, in this point in time, most Americans don't even know where Vietnam is. President Kennedy at the time actually had to get on TV and do like a news conference with a map of Asia to show the United States people where Vietnam was, where we were sending troops to. That's how little known Vietnam was. So a lot of people thought, what the heck are we doing? Some kids wear a black armband, as you can see here, to school, and the school suspends them for doing that. And they say, no, that's our freedom of speech. And so it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. All right, free speech in the internet. So now we're starting to see places like Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, whatever, censor the internet. Like they're not allowing certain people to post certain things. And a lot of people are starting to say, wait, that's my freedom of speech. We'll talk about in the next day or two if that's legal or not. Freedom of the press. Oftentimes the press is considered a watchdog of our government because they expose things that our government might be doing illegally. And they're allowed to print basically whatever they want to. I say print, or you can post on the internet now, put on their news show, talk about on the radio. Here's some guys that they were just journalists, guys that worked for the Washington Post newspaper that ended up researching all this stuff into things that President Nixon was doing back in like the 1960s, which exposed one of the greatest scandals ever in our country's government history, to the point where President Nixon, our president, had to resign, quit his job due to that. You may have heard of Watergate before. Again, I'm not going to get too much into it now because you're going to learn a lot more about it next year in U.S. history. Here's a movie about that whole scandal, actually. And this is how much of a government geek I am. This DVD is actually sitting right next to my TV right now because I just watched it. Great movie. Oh, so there's another movie you guys can watch. I mentioned 2 in the last episode that I taped. This is where it might come into effect with you guys. There have been some court cases, and school newspapers aren't really a thing anymore. Back when I was in high school, school newspapers were pretty cool, but that wasn't that long ago. But still dealing with schools and maybe what we produce at schools, they can be censored. This court case, which we're going to talk more about in our next block, Hazelwood School District versus Colmeyer. There's a school newspaper. Some kids write some articles in it, and the principal says, no, you can't. We're not going to publish those articles for specific reasons, and we'll talk about why those are. And the kids are like, no, that's our freedom of speech. We should be allowed freedom of the press. We should be allowed to write those things. Now, had this newspaper been outside of school, yep, they would have been just fine. The government can't censor the news and censor. What do I mean by that? Like, they can't force, um, let's say, ABC News at night. They do like their nighttime news at 6 p.m. They can't, our government can't say, ABC, you need to turn in your news show at 5 o'clock so we can watch it to make sure it's okay before you air it. They can't do that. That's called censorship. That's where they're like ahead of time making sure something is okay. They can get in trouble. ABC can get in trouble for what they put in the news, but they can't be stopped from putting it in there. That's what censorship would be. And again, this deals with, because some of you might run into this, where you have to give a speech at a school function, or maybe one of you guys, hey, you're such a great academic student that you're the valedictorian, you get to give a speech at graduation. If Mrs. Knoth or Mr. Howard or someone in administration says, I need to see that speech beforehand, they're allowed to look at it and say, you can't say that. They can censor our speech in schools. Outside of schools, not necessarily so much. So what you can do, you can print any political position. So if someone wants to print something that says Joe Biden is a terrible person, they can. Or Donald Trump is a terrible person, they can. They can make fun of people, especially politicians. The press can. If you ever watch the TV show Saturday Night Live on NBC on Saturday nights, like, they just rip on politicians all the time and make fun of them. You can do that. You can expose wrongs by the government. You can say things that might not agree with. Okay. You can't intentionally, like on purpose, do something or write something or say something that injures a person's reputation by using false facts. You can't do that on purpose by knowingly doing so. You can't disclose defense security secrets. So if someone finds out about something with our national security and defense, you can't like print those things or put them on the news. And you can't detail how to make certain weapons. So if you open up a blog about how to make a nuclear bomb, or like some sort of bomb that you could, whatever, any sort of bomb probably, like, you can't do that. You can get in trouble for that. All right, freedom of assembly. In terms of assembly, like getting together, right? That's what you do in an assembly. Everybody gets together. You can protest. You can have a parade as long as you get a permit, usually from the local or city government. And they can't just say, well, we're not going to give you a permit because you're that person or you're that group. As long as you can basically prove that you're going to have a peaceful parade, they have to grant you that permit. You can have a parade where you're chanting hate slogans. Gang members, even if it's a bad gang, can congregate in public. Once again, as long as they're not inciting violence and doing anything wrong, they're allowed to do that. You can't protest by throwing rocks and breaking windows and doing violent things. Obviously, that's illegal stuff. It's vandalism. You can't hang out on private land against the owner's will. It's called loitering. Or at that point, you might be like breaking and entering almost to a sense. Or that's why a lot of like stores, there's a sign out front that says no loitering. Like, you can't just hang out on their doorstep. And you cannot have a teen curfew, although there have been some curfews, and we'll look at those a little bit, that are legal, where governments have said certain ages can't be out past a certain time. Excuse me. Lastly, petition the government. Congress shall make no law abridging or against stopping the people to petition the government for redress of grievances, for claiming that their liberties and freedoms are being broken. So you may sue the government if you feel the government has done something wrong to you. You're allowed to take the government to court, which is basically petitioning the government. You cannot be punished for exposing wrongs by the government. So if you find out that some politicians did some illegal things and you expose that, or you petition that, you're fine. You're allowed to do that. And then the courts decide what those wrongs may be. All right, I know we've covered a lot there. Again, that's all First Amendment stuff, and we're going to get a little bit more into that as we move forward into the next block, which will be next week after Thanksgiving. Okay, here's your job. On Google Classroom, I have posted an article from Upfront Magazine, which is a magazine that is made for high school students specifically. There's an article on there, and it deals with these 5 pieces of the Bill of Rights and how it has or does affect high school students in high schools. You need to read through that article. There's also, with that assignment, posted a guided reading that asks some questions about what's in that article. Okay, your job is to read the article, answer the questions, and then pay close attention, like we've done in the past. When you are done answering the questions in the guided reading, you then need to turn it to Google Classroom, return it, submit it. Then in the chat on our Zoom, let me know that you are done. I will then go into Google Classroom, look to see if it's done and complete. If that's the case, I will chat you back and give you permission to leave class for the day. If you're not done and complete with it, or there's some sections of it not done, or you need to change some things, I will let you then know so that you can go back, redo it, or finish it up, and then return it back to me. Okay, but you may not leave this Zoom meeting until you have permission from me to do so. And you got to finish that worksheet to get that done. All right, good luck. Go get it.